So, hello and welcome to my talk, Angular Forms for Humans, Real-World Accessibility. I briefly introduce myself because the form is already pre-filled. I was introduced. I am a Google developer expert in Angular. Besides that, I'm a developer, book author, and workshop trainer. I wrote a book on web accessibility, but it's in German, so never mind. Let's kick in and press this start button. When I learned, that's my first time for Angular Connect, when I learned that the conference is being revived, I submit my abstract straight away. And it was like months ago. And when preparing for my talk, I had to, refresh the memories. I went to the website to check the abstract that I submitted, like what I'm supposed to talk about. And then I discovered that I actually accidentally broke the website. So if you go to the abstract, you would probably see this gap, and this gap in the abstract is the input. That's the HTML element, which is the input. So after this talk, if you have some questions and need an icebreaker, you don't know how to talk to me, well, you could approach me with all the failures, like all the accessibility issues which are now on this input field, just to get started the conversation. So, Alex and Miles told that developers love signals and forms love signals. Well, I hate forms. And by the end of my talk, I hoped you're gonna hate forms too. Well, kidding, but why do I hate forms? If you look on the slide, you will notice the vast variety of possible controls. You have radio buttons, you have drop-downs, aka combo boxes. You have text fields, you have info buttons and the labels, you have progress bars, you have checkboxes. Well, a lot of things that want to be styled, which is not quite easy, and then a lot of UX and design opinions and little guidance on how to implement that in an accessible way. So it's not the easiest topic, to be honest. What I mean by accessible when I talk about accessible forms today. I mean in particular WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, a set of requirements, and I pre-selected the requirements from this standard which are particularly relevant for the forms. And today I'm gonna briefly go through all of them, the relevant ones, not all of the requirements, no worries. Well, I will speed up. But I've heard that the next speaker is Elleran. He's a nice guy, so I hope he will forgive me if it takes a bit longer. So let's get started. The first two, meaningful sequence and focus order. Make sure that your visible order of the elements is the same as the one in the code, because when people navigate via keyboard, the elements are focused in the sequence that is in your code. So the best way to make an accessible form is to not to use something like flexbox revert column or using grid and then rearranging the elements in some artificial way. So make sure the order is the same. Then, when we focus elements, the focus outline should be visible, so enough contrast, thick enough, whatever, but it also should not be obscured. So if you have any drop boxes or cookie banners, etc., make sure they close once the user navigates further so that the elements are not hidden behind some activated things. The next requirement is info and relationship, and this sounds a bit confusing, but in fact, if you are a sighted person, you would see the label and the input field, and you will, by the proximity of those two, you will recognize that they belong together. If you're a blind person, you won't see it. So we need to combine them programmatically, and many of you already know how to do that. You either nest your input or any control in your label, or even better, because it performs better with voice recognition, to combine them explicitly. So you use the ID, in this case name, and for attribute name, and then you combine those two, and then assistive technologies know what's the label for this field. Next one is reflow. Squash your website on 300 to 320 pixel and check if you have to scroll in both directions. Because if you do, it's a failure of Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Well, and it's really confusing to stay on one line. That's the requirement, like the official one, but there is also a recommendation not to put the inputs or any controls in 2 columns or multiple columns, because people using a magnifier might miss the left, right part of your form and not knowing that there is something else there. So it's better to use the linear top to bottom flow. But that's just a recommendation. Next one, quite obvious one. Contrast, it's 3:1 for large and bold text or bold text, and 4.5:1 for normal text. That's something that many of you know, but I observe it quite often that people forget that non-text elements also have to have enough contrast. For example, this X button or close button, it also has to have enough contrast. It has to be 3:1, and the outline of the form also has to be visible, because otherwise people just don't know where the input field is. So make sure your non-text contrast is there as well. Next one. Also important, everything is important. So next one is keyboard. Of course, all the functionality of your website has to be reachable via keyboard, but it's so important that they have an extra criterion for that, no keyboard trap. If I'm able to navigate to some particular area on the website, I should be able to navigate away using keyboard as well. And the common pitfall for that is the rich text editor. Imagine I have a list, and then if I jump into the text area and start hitting the tab key, then I will probably just increase the indentation and moving the text further, but I'm not escaping from this editor. So to do so, to fix it, you could provide some shortcuts for how to jump out of the text area. Next point, on focus and on input. Whenever the users just focus some control or input some data, don't redirect them to different page. A common pattern is whenever you have a SMS code that you got in the 2-factor authorization process, you type it in, and just with the last digit you got redirected to the page behind the login. Well, that's the gray area. Actually, you shouldn't go redirect users somewhere else. You could, though, display more questions, like follow-up questions, some remarks, etc., are absolutely okay, because you don't change the context, you change the content. So adding something up, it's no problem. Redirecting to something else, changing the topic, that's an issue. Next one, label and name. Whenever you have buttons with visible text, please, 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 don't put any ARIA labeled by on that. Just chill. Not doing anything is the best accessibility in this sense. However, because ARIA label or ARIA labeled by would overwrite the assistive, like accessible text. And if I'm using voice control and would request visible text button, and I've overwritten it for the assistive tech, they won't find it because they know this button as invisible text button. That's why just chill. However, if you have icon buttons or if you have buttons without visible text, then you might use ARIA label, ARIA labeled by, or any other options or techniques for that. If you have questions, just ping me after the talk, because I have to move on with the next criterion, and that's name, role, value. More than often, people, our designer team want us to style our controls, and it's quite hard from time to time, so we end up implementing or re-implementing the functionality ourselves. I am a lazy person, and I don't want to reinvent the wheel, so I'm a friend of getting inspired by some libraries. The problem is that just quite a few which are accessibility centered, and to highlight, I would name like the design system of the UK government, which is open source. You can have a look at them. Colibri, which is the open source library for the German government. The German authorities also provide a list of requirements for several form controls, like progress bar or tabs or whatever. So it's not a code, you won't find code examples there, but it's a full list of requirements case by case for every single control you might imagine in a form. So quite helpful. The next one is ARIA Authoring Practice Guide. This website is cited or recommended quite often, but I have to warn you because this website is meant as a showcase for ARIA. So you will find some code snippets there, but they are meant to showcase ARIA. You might find better solutions with native HTML elsewhere. Nevertheless, quite a nice resource because they describe the expected keyboard patterns, interaction patterns, so it's really nice to have a look at that. Remember I mentioned UK government and Colibri. Those are accessibility-centered libraries, but they are also styled, and that's quite a problem. Like all the accessibility they have comes at a price. And I have really good news with Angular ARIA or Headless UI, which is already experimental, which will provide several patterns which give you all the necessary scaffolding for accessibility. For example, for a dropdown or a list box, a list where you can choose some options from, and this part of CDK will take care of the necessary accessibility role and the name, make sure that this is communicated to assistive technologies, and you get to style it. So I'm super excited about it. I'm definitely going to talk about this in my next talks and blogs and whatever. I'm really looking forward to this more accessible future. So it's really nice. But when you implement your custom elements, make sure they're big enough. And no, it's hidden. I'm sorry about that. The last point is target size here. Make sure that the elements are big enough, at least 24 by 24 pixel. And it's particularly relevant for radio buttons, checkboxes, but also for the options in your dropdowns, aka combo boxes, because those are quite common pitfalls for that. Remember, I told you that I have a lot of requirements that's selected for today. So I have some bad news, it's even more, so keep going. The next one is consistent identification. If you have several buttons on your website with the same functionality, they have to be named consistently. So don't do delete, remove, submit if that's the same functionality. You have to make sure it's named consistently. The next one is about consistent and helpful labels. So you have to provide labels for your inputs or any other controls as well, and they have to be meaningful, reflecting what should be entered in this field, and specific. For example, date. Sometimes it's confusing. Is it the starting date? It's the due date. So it's helpful to provide more information, but that's not a coding requirement. It's more of on the semantics. The same goes for the fields that have some validation on that. If you have required fields, you can go with required as plain text and put it on your field. You can also state all fields are required at the beginning of your form, if it's true. Or you can work with stars, but you have to provide an explanation. Required fields are marked with star. You can also put optional as text. Well, you should either go for required or for optional. To make sure that it's clear what to enter into these fields. And if you have any pattern validation, some min length, max length requirement, then you have to provide it as well. The next one is about the assistive tech and helping them to fill out the forms. You know, with AI as well, maybe we'll talk to websites and they will pre-fill it for us. And for that, they need to understand programmatically what kind of information we're expecting. So autocomplete is the best way to go with that. And if you want to be surprised today, go check out the documentation of autocomplete. There are way more values or possible values for autocomplete that I knew before this talk. So it's a nice way to support autocomplete options in the browser. Well, but no matter how hard we try, errors happen, and we have to make sure that we communicate this state. First of all, we go with aria invalid, which we have to put on the control, which is invalid. And I have good news again. We won't need this * dot anymore, so we can continue with aria invalid quite soon. And with that, we are communicating the state to the assistive technology. But we also need to combine the error message with the input field. And the state of the art at the moment is to do so with aria described by. So I have an ID on the text, on the error message, and then I just refer it in aria described by. There is also aria error message, which is actually from the semantics and from the specs, etc., more suitable for that. However, the browser support is getting better, that's the good news, but it's not there yet. So as of now, it's still the state of the art to do so. Once we indicated the state and told the user, well, it's not working, it's broken, we have to provide some suggestions how to fix it. And that's, again, why I hate forms, because, well, there is this requirement of error suggestions, but no one tells you what is helpful, like what is the helpful message? Is my message helpful enough? So in this case, I just go with please insert the first name. Even better is to prevent errors, especially if filling in the form has some legal, financial, or data consequences. So the requirements in Web Content Accessibility Guidelines state that you have to provide a confirmation page where users can double-check their inputs, and or you have to make this operation revertible, so so the users can revert what they just submitted. You should also support the users in case they've entered user-based data within the same session. And it turns out field set's quite a nice way to do so. For example, for billing and shipping addresses, you can provide a checkbox and the data will be just taken over. The same goes for just pre-filling data in the forms for logged-in users, making sure you don't have to do double work. The last but not the least, status messages. Imagine you're filling the form and the session is about to expire, and you see like a huge banner somewhere above the form. No way you will hear it as a user or of a screen reader unless you made sure that this information is available for assistive technologies. So take a moment and think about your forms. If you have some toasts, some messages that you display via JavaScript, which are hard to discover. For all these cases, you might need, for example, ARIA Live or Live Announcer, which is a syntactical sugar rounded from Angular Material CDK. So this was just a brief outline of the relevant requirements, but well, I've also heard everyone loves single forms and is excited about it. And it got me thinking, like I showed you some code already, but it was from the reactive forms. What about single-based forms? Do we have to relearn all the things about the accessibility? And I have good news here, and I hope you see my screen, yes? Because I provided a basic form. I will zoom in, which is a single-based form. And let's dive into the code. And you will see actually a very similar syntax. What I have here, I have the touched API, I have the option to check for invalid. So actually, it's the same functionality that I had before. I have here the same example with like pristine. It's not there yet, but touched and invalid is the same. And I just replaced it with a different syntax. So good. So far, so good. I have ARIA invalid, it stays the same for ARIA disabled by, described by. So there's a little to these things that I have to rethink in terms of accessibility. And as of now, funnily, I just forgot to remove ngSubmit from a format. It appears to work. So with ngSubmit, I could submit the form by clicking the enter while being on the form. So it's, again, a nice feature which Angular gives us out of the box. And as of now, I don't know, it's going to stay like this. I look at the Google team. But as of now, it works. So don't expect that it's experimental. But just to make sure, just to point out that there are just syntactical changes for now for accessibility. Next thing is about the error messages. Well, as of now, there is no has error, but I still can reach it, and I think that might change as well. What I do at the moment, it's I go to the message field and I check the errors, and I have several options. Now I go for the first error and I check what kind of error is it, and then I could display the relevant error, like here. If I go to the message and it's minimum 10 characters, you see that there is a message, specific message for this kind of errors. However, you could also iterate through the errors with the for loop and then display all the relevance. Up to you. It's the UX decision how to do so. Well, I think for this we are good. So coming back to the website that I broke accidentally, as I said, now that you know what are the requirements on the controls and forms, you can have a look and think how many of the ones that I mentioned today I managed to broke accidentally. I'm very sorry to do so by submitting my abstract. With that, thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, just ping me via socials, email now. I'm looking forward to your questions.